Welcome to the chalkboard, my fellow football nerds, for episode number 64 of Chalk Talk, brought to you by the Painted Lines. I'm your host, Shane Half, and you can follow me on Twitter at halfandhalf_TPL. I'm joined by the best co-host in the game. You've heard him on the Tough Cover radio show. It is Mark Henry Jr. Give him a follow on Twitter at Mark Henry Jr. Mark, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing fantastic. A little bit of a break from the sports calendar. This is definitely the deadest week of the year. There's the MLB is on an all-star break. We're right before we kind of really kick it into high gear with training camp and stuff like that. Basketball's kind of finally calmed down with all the moves. It really is just a time for peace in the sports world before I started thinking about weekends, what weekends are like right now compared to what weekends become in September, October, November, and going forward. And it's so funny to think about how I'm outside doing things, I'm going places, and then from September to whatever, I have pretty locked in plans from 12 o'clock to 12 p.m. to 11 p.m. Every Saturday and Sunday. I'm ready for the switch, but it's definitely crazy adjustment.
Yeah, we are on the last legs of football free time. We're about to kick off training camps, and then of course preseason, and then into the real meat of the schedule. We get into the regular season, so I'm excited for it. I'm also excited to just be out of summer. It has been over 100 degrees every day this month where I live, and the 10-day forecast shows it the same moving forward. We hit 111 degrees today, so it's just ridiculous heat. That the local pizza place here in my town actually cooked a pizza outside today. They just set it outside and they live streamed it to Facebook, and in 2 hours they cooked it and then they ate it on Facebook Live. So that's where we're at in Oklahoma. Man, I need it to not be this hot. It's literally the hottest and driest summer of the last century in Oklahoma right now. So I'm also, open to moving. So if anybody wants to send me plane tickets to Canada or something, I would certainly welcome some cooler weather, and I might be willing to take you up on it. But maybe let's dive in.
Maybe not Canada, but I'm trying to do a good segue here. But we can talk about Green Bay, Wisconsin, and Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Detroit, Michigan, and Chicago, Illinois. Those are northern teams in an NFC division.
That's true. I could
rough segue.
I could go for some Chicago-style pizza right now.
Are you a deep dish guy?
Well, I've never had it very much. I mean, there was a place when I lived in Oklahoma City that had really good Chicago-style pizza. That's really the only place I've ever had it much, though. There's not a lot of Chicago-style pizza around here, but I do like it the few times that I've had it.
By the way, before we get into the NFC North, I realized I didn't address the fact that my camera's not on. Don't know what's going on there, folks. Technical difficulties, but we'll figure it out for next week. For now, you'll just have to deal with the dulcet tones of my voice instead of seeing my face for radio.
Mark let his girlfriend give him a haircut, and it didn't turn out well, so he came up with this broken camera story.
I did actually get a haircut. I did.
And he's just waiting until it grows back out, and then he's like, look, I fixed my camera.
that would be a good conspiracy. By the way, I have a little tease for later on in the show, my final thoughts. I have an Eagles-related conspiracy to pitch you about the coaching staff about last year going into this year. So that's a fun little tease.
All right. I like it. Well, let's dig into the meat of this show here. We're going to kick it off with the NFC North. Then we're going to preview the NFC West. That will complete the NFC. So if you missed our NFC East and NFC South show, it is episode number 63. You can find it on YouTube. You can find it on Apple, the Apple Podcast app. So be sure and check that out. But today we are all about the NFC North and West, and we're going to kick it off with the Detroit Lions. So just some of the key additions for the Lions this offseason, obviously. They got Aiden Hutchinson out of the draft. That was one of the worst kept secrets in the history of NFL drafts, was that they were going to take Aiden Hutchinson. They also got Jamison Williams. And then, getting away from the draft, they also signed DJ Shark in free agency. They lost Trey Flowers, is really their only big loss off of their team. And so they head into this season with a fairly easy schedule. Warren Sharp has them rated with the 5th easiest schedule. You might have seen different numbers, but the numbers I'm going to be using on the show are Sharp's numbers, and it's based off of the projected win totals for each of their opponents. So they project to have the 5th easiest schedule this season. Their over-under right now is set. Well, I say right now. Their over-under when I made these notes several days ago was at 6.5 wins. And it was minus 130 to take the over. It was even to take the under. So, Mark, talk about where are you kind of at with the Lions, and what would you take? Would you take the over or the under here?
This is actually one of the teams that I would say I have the most concrete opinion on going into this season. And I've kind of been in the – I don't know if you've seen this on Twitter, Shane, but I've kind of been in the mud about the Lions and with Lions fans. I think that there's kind of been – an incorrect narrative formed about the 2021 Lions. They went 3-13-1. And I think some people have decided to do the whole, they weren't as bad as you think. And they were in a lot of games and they played close and they battled and all this football speak type of stuff. But if you take a look and you really break it down, I don't necessarily know if that's fair. I think it's kind of a fallacy. They lost 44-6 to a 2-5 Eagles team. They got the Eagles season going, to be quite honest. They lost 38-10 to a Teddy Bridgewater-led Broncos team. They lost by 22 to a 6-10 Seattle team at home. They got swept by the Matt Nagy coached Bears. Like, I think that there's kind of been a bit of a revisionist history on how good of a coach Dan Campbell was last year and how much fight the Lions had and all this stuff. And now they've got Hard Knocks, and the hype machine, I think, is only going to go up from here. I think people have fully talked themselves in to the Lions winning 8+ games. And I think that that's outrageous. Their under is one of my favorite win totals in general on the entire season. I don't think this team sniffs 7 wins. I have them at 4-13. I actually like a lot of the things they did. Hutchinson's a really good player. He's going to help out. Jameson Williams, while he probably won't help their win total much this year with his injury, I think we both loved Jameson Williams, and we thought that was a great move for Detroit to move up and get him without even having to give up that much to go up and get him. I think that Detroit's doing a lot of good things. Amon-Ra St. Brown, the guy who I think is really underrated. I think he was fantastic last year. I have him. I put out my fantasy rankings today, actually, for a cheap plug on my Twitter. And he was actually number 20 on my receivers list, Amon-Ra St. Brown. There's a lot to like in Detroit, but Dan Campbell's still the head coach and Jared Goff's still the quarterback. Like, you're only gonna get so far when those are the two heads of your organization. So I honestly think the best case scenario for the Lions this season would be to kind of bottom out and to go 3-14 again and win 3 games and know that you need to go get your quarterback in a very quarterback heavy draft next year where you'll have a high pick. So I feel the same way about the Jets and some other teams where they're getting all this buzz after being absolutely terrible last year. And I don't believe in the head coach or the quarterback. It's hard for me to buy in.
Yeah, they had the 6th worst point differential last year,
Yep.
at negative 142. And the team that was above them was 42 points better than them at only negative 100 in the Panthers. So, yeah, that I agree with you. That's a little bit of a revisionist history in terms of that narrative. And they have some good weapons. They have Amon-Ra St. Brown, who had a breakout year last year. They went and signed DJ Shark. They traded up for Jameson Williams. It's a good group of weapons. And I like a lot of what they did this offseason. But at the end of the day, Jared Goff is still the quarterback. And Jared Goff can get Sean McVay to a Super Bowl, or maybe we should say Sean McVay could get Jared Goff to a Super Bowl.
Definitely.
But Dan Campbell is not Sean McVay, and it just takes so much to go right and so much to be spoon-fed to Goff. I mean, we have the stories that McVay was in Goff's ear until the headset cut out before every play, telling him what the defense was running. Like, Goff can't be the quarterback. The Lions know that he can't be the quarterback. It just didn't sit right for them this year to take one at number 2. Yeah, honestly, and this isn't Madden. You can't do this, and it's hard to root for this as a fan. But the best thing that could happen for Lions fans this year is to have a 1-2-3 win season and be able to get the quarterback this offseason. And so if you're a Lions fan, you root for Hutchinson and Williams and some of these guys to be good, just not good enough to win you a bunch of games this year. So I definitely like the under 6.5 wins, especially since it's even and over is -130. So I would take the under. I don't think this is a 7+ win team.
Yeah, and I think there's going to be two really good teams in this division. So we'll get to that, and I think that only hurts the Lions' chances of, even getting to respectability. Like, I don't see this team winning 6 games. So I actually initially had them at 3, and I had another team that we'll talk about at 5, but I ended up just narrowing those out to 4 each. So we'll get to that, though.
So you talked about 2 good teams in this division. Let's go ahead and talk about one of them in the Chicago Bears.
Oh, yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the Bears. This offseason, they added Kyler Gordon and Jaquan Brisker were their 2 big additions in the draft, both defensive backs. They traded a 7th-round pick for N'Keal Harry, some passability at wide receiver. They got defensive tackle Justin Jones via free agency. They also signed Byron Pringle, wide receiver, and they signed offensive guard Lucas Patrick. They lost Khalil Mack. They traded him to the Chargers for the pick that became Jaquan Brisker. They also picked up a 6th in the 2023 draft. They lost Allen Robinson in free agency. They lost offensive guard James Daniels, and then they lost Akeem Hicks. And so some pretty significant losses from them that it far outweighs the additions that they made. They have, according to Warren Sharp, they have the 4th easiest schedule in the NFL this year. They fired Pace and Nagy. They hired Pools and Eberflus this offseason. The over-under is set at 6.5 wins. For this one, it's kind of flipped of the Lions. Under is -140. The over is +110. I know you think the Bears are going to stink. Tell me why.
I think they might be one of the 2 or 3 worst rosters in the NFL. I think the current GM and the prior GM and the prior head coach, throw him in that bin, should all be tried for like treason against their quarterback. Like, they should be tried in a court of law and be forced to defend decisions they're making. It really seems like they've given up on Justin Fields already. And I think that that's a shame, because I don't think that we've seen enough at all to give up on him. And I'm not even as high on Justin Fields as you are. I'm sure you'll get into that. You're a huge Justin Fields guy, and I'm sure you still believe in them, but you're also just as disappointed as I am. And ultimately, if he's a next level quarterback and a next level player, it'll shine. Maybe it won't shine as much as it should, but it'll be evident. And I think that there will be moments this year where it's like, oh, wow, if he only had a competent organization, then they'll be good. But I think this is literally the worst possible situation in the entire NFL, besides maybe the Texans. But you know what? I take that back. I think the Texans actually have a better offensive line. So, and Brandon Cooks is probably the best pass catcher on either team. The Bears are the worst situation in the NFL for a young quarterback to develop in my opinion. I think they have definitely the worst receiving core. David Montgomery's solid, but they have a bad offensive line. And then you go out, and instead of getting an offensive mind to kind of help out Justin Fields and move into the modern 21st century, you go out and get Matt Eberflus, who, like, fine, whatever. Some people think he's a smart mind, but, like, you know me, we've talked about it, and we talked about it a lot in head coaching carousel season. Like, I would go offensive-minded head coaches 100% of the time, because if you ever get a good play caller offensively as an offensive coordinator, he's just going to get hired away to be a head coach elsewhere, and you're going to have to start over. So I think that that's just more important on the offensive side of the ball than the defensive side of the ball, to not have to start over. So I really hate everything they did this offseason, from the front office to the coaching staff, to the players they added, to the players they didn't add in the draft. I really hated their offseason for Justin Fields and for the Bears in general. So I'm going under on that 6.5. And like I said, I initially had them at 5 wins, but I actually bumped them down to 4 and bumped the Lions up from 3 to 4. So I kind of look at the Bears and Lions the exact same way as two of the cellar dwellers of not just this division, but the entire NFC and NFL as a whole.
Yeah, it's going to be ugly in Chicago this year. And I will give Pools the fact that he inherited a mess and he gutted it. And if he didn't have a highly invested in quarterback that he didn't know what he was yet, I wouldn't mind that. But the Bears are phoning in this season, and they're doing it with the worst offensive line in the NFL and the worst receiving group in the NFL. Now, how are you going to evaluate a second-year quarterback in that context? I like Kyler Gordon. I had a first-round grade on both Kyler Gordon and Jaquan Brisker, and they got them both in the second round. That's great value. The problem is they just did not address offensive line. They did not address wide receiver. How can you expect for Justin Fields to be better? And at the end of the day, what's more important than making Justin Fields your franchise guy? And so I get what's going on here. You inherited a mess. You gutted it. You're trying to rebuild, but you're doing it at the expense of your quarterback. And even if the quarterback comes through this, you are wasting those years of his rookie deal. So it's just not a good position for Chicago to be in. I will take the under on this one as well. I'm not as confident on the under as I am for Detroit, because if Fields figures it out, if he clicks, a quarterback can just elevate a team. And so I don't think they get to 7 wins. I feel pretty comfortable in the under, but not as good about it as I do the Lions.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that I feel probably a little bit better about the Lions one, but I feel really good about both of those unders. They're probably two of my 5 to 7 favorite win totals in the whole NFL.
All right. Well, let's move on to one of the actual good teams in this division that you alluded to, a team that I think you're quite a bit higher on than a lot of people. It's the Minnesota Vikings. Additions from this offseason, they added Lewis Cine and Andrew Booth, one of your favorite players in the draft, obviously via the draft. They got Zadarius Smith, the outside linebacker, defensive tackle Harrison Phillips, and then they got Jordan Hicks to be their inside linebacker. They lost Michael Pierce, tight end Tyler Conklin, center Mason Cole, and safety Xavier Woods. They have the 16th strength of schedule, so they're right in the middle of the NFL. Their over-under is set at 9 wins, 1 year after they fired Rick Spielman and Mike Zimmer, which was long overdue. They're transitioning to a 3-4 roster, I believe, this year, and they went out and hired Kevin O'Connell to be their head coach. So tell me why you are so high on the Vikings.
Well, I think that it's just that last year was the worst possible scenario in terms of health, in terms of the team and coaching staff imploding on each other. Their head coach and their quarterback weren't speaking words to each other by the end of the season. I think that their defense fell apart, and their scheme, which is Mike Zimmer's whole job as the head coach, is to take care of the defense, and it entirely fell apart. They lost an absolute ton of close games. Unlike the Lions, they actually did find a crazy way to lose close games. And I think that there's just, with natural regression, they're probably due to win an extra game or two with better health from Dalvin Cook and others. I think they're due to go 9-8, 10-7. But I think that this is the team where I think every year there's a team where, 15, 16 weeks into the season, we're sitting there going, oh, wow, the Vikings are 11-4, or the Vikings are, 10-5 and competing with Green Bay for the division. And this game in week 17 on New Year's Day that we're looking at, like, that could be a huge game for the division, and I think it will be. I think they're going to pop up on us a little bit, almost like Arizona did last year, where I don't know if Minnesota goes 10-0, but I think they're going to kind of be the team that surprises some and kind of stakes a claim as a contender in the NFC. I think the roster speaks for itself, especially on offense, when I think their offensive line is improved. You have a guy in Irv Smith who people are excited about at tight end, but I'll leave him out. So you just look at the top 4 guys in the core 4 of that offense. You have a quarterback who I know people aren't high on in Kirk Cousins, but he is absolutely a top 15 quarterback in the NFL, if not, top 20. So I think he can get it done with the guys that they're giving him, with Dalvin Cook, who's one of the 5 to 10 best running backs, with Justin Jefferson, who's one of the 2 to 3 best receivers, and with Adam Thielen, who I feel like is kind of getting forgot about in fantasy purposes. Sorry, I always bring up like one thing for fantasy every show. to annoy Shane. But Adam Thielen, a guy who I feel like is getting drafted in the mid-30s among receivers for fantasy, I would draft him in the top 25 among receivers. He's a guy who I expect, as long as Kirk Cousins is there, to get fed. And I think he's a guy who's been productive for every game that he's been out there. He's had health issues as well. He missed about half the year last year. You'd have to hope for better health from him there. And the main reason that I like it is I think that they smell like the team with the first year rookie head coach that comes in and fixes the culture, which clearly there was a culture issue with Mike Zimmer, and there was a scheme issue with his defense falling apart. I think getting a smart guy, a former quarterback from the McVay Rams coaching tree, you bring him in. I think he's the type of guy who turns this around, and maybe it's not even as big of a turnaround as we think, because like I said, everything went wrong and they still won 8 games. So I don't think it's going to take much of a crazy turnaround to get to 11 or 12 wins. I have them at 11 wins, but I could be talked into 12 pretty easily. I have them as a wild card, but you could talk me into them winning the division or at least competing with Green Bay for the division. I think this is going to be a really, really good team and a tough out in the playoffs.
Yeah, I have them going over the 9 wins. I think they're a double-digit win team. I mean, last season, you had a coach who clearly did not like and wouldn't work with his quarterback. And I'm sure, it doesn't really matter where the faults are. That's your job as a coach. And that definitely negatively impacted them. Their point differential last year was only -1. And so this was a team that lost a lot of close games. They had, like you mentioned, bad injury luck, and they had an incompetent head coach. And they were still only 1 win below this over-under win total. I like what they did in the draft. I think they added 2 really good defensive backs. They didn't really need to add much on offense. They've got a really good offense if Cousins performs and if guys stay healthy. And so I'm with you here. I don't think they can take the Packers for the division, but I do think this is a double-digit win team and a wild card team come playoff time.
In general, I should just say I'm all in on the Vikings overall from a fantasy perspective. Just to finish out that fantasy thought, Kirk Cousins is being drafted, like if you look at ADP, like the 16th or 17th quarterback off the draft boards. I would take him 12th. I think he's a legitimate fantasy starter this year with Justin Jefferson and with Dalvin Cook and with Adam Thielen. And Dalvin Cook's a guy who's going bottom half of the top 10. I would take him in the top 5 to 6 drafts. Justin Jefferson's a guy who probably going at number 6, number 7 overall. I would take Justin Jefferson as high as 4th overall on my fantasy football draft. So it's not just a real life perspective thing. I'm all in on the Vikings on all fronts. I'm going to have that over 9. I'll probably place a little wager on them maybe to win the NFC. I'm not sure what the juice is on that. And I'll have a lot of fantasy shares of Cousins, Jefferson, and the other guys. So I'm all in on the Vikings this year, which is a funny thing. I don't think I've ever been all in on a Kirk Cousins team, so he'll probably break my heart here.
He is good at doing that. Let's roll on to the Green Bay Packers as we round out the NFC North. The Packers added notably added.
Time out real quick. I like this graphic. Big fan.
I do too.
Of the layout. Big fan.
Yeah, I really like this one. I almost mentioned that when I first put it up. This is one of my favorite schedule graphics. So they notably in the draft did not add a first-round wide receiver after dealing Devontae Adams. They drafted Quay Walker and Devontae Wyatt. Then they added Christian Watson in the 2nd round. They lost Devontae Adams, so they traded him to the Raiders. They got the pick they used for Quay Walker and a 2nd rounder that they later traded along with another 2nd rounder to get Christian Watson. So essentially, they traded Devontae Adams and a 2nd round pick for Christian Watson and Quay Walker, which is just horrific value. They lost Zadarius Smith to Minnesota. They lost Marquez Valdez-Scantling. They lost guard Lucas Patrick, who I think he went to the Bears. I can't remember now. So they lost some talent in the division. This is a team that is asking Aaron Rodgers to do absolutely everything for this offense. They had a good defense last year. They went 2 first-round picks on the defense again this year. Their strength of schedule is 15th, so it's right there with the Vikings. Their over-under is at 10.5 with -140 on the over, +120 on the under. Before I ask you what you think of the Packers, let me read a few comments here about the Vikings. We've got R.H. Lamont says on YouTube that Kirk always falters in the bright lights, which is true. Robert Powell says Minnesota could have 20 Pro Bowlers on their team and they would still lose the playoff game.
That's fair.
Losing in the playoffs is a tradition in Minnesota. So we do have some haters on the Vikings here in the chat. Mark, the Packers, 10.5 wins. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Like, I feel like I had a lot to say about the Bears and the Lions and the Vikings. I don't have much to say here. Like, I actually am more concerned about the Zadarius Smith loss than the Devontae Adams loss. Like, I think Aaron Rodgers will carry that offense to be what it's going to be. But how I feel about the Packers is that they're going to be good. They're going to be a 10-plus win team. I would go over on that 10.5, but I won't be betting it. I have them at 12. But like I said, you could talk me into shifting Minnesota to 12 and shifting Green Bay down to 11 and flipping them or vice versa. So this isn't one that I'm very confident in. But I don't think that this is a team that's a legitimate contender to go and win a Super Bowl. I really don't. I think this is a team where we've seen this is not the best Packers team of the last couple of years. Like the last couple Packers teams will be better than this team with Devontae and with Zadarius and with some of the guys that they've lost. So I just don't think that this will be the Packers team that breaks through that Aaron Rodgers glass ceiling that they seem to have met over the last couple of years. So I really this is kind of one of those teams where, yeah, they'll be in the playoffs, but I don't see the path to them being an actual contender.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you said. If I was betting this, which I would not, I would stay away from it, but I would take the over. I expect them to win the division. I expect them to make an early exit from the playoffs again because that's what they do. This is not a better team than the Packers teams of the last few years. And Aaron Rodgers, until he proves again that he can do it in the playoffs, and I know he's won a Super Bowl. What has he done in the last several years in the postseason? He hasn't done anything. And so I'm not a believer in the Packers to really make a run as long as that's there. The Zadarius Smith loss, like you said, is a big loss. I know they went and they got Quay Walker. I have concerns about this team. Now they're in a weak NFC, and so they're definitely going to make the playoffs. And Aaron Rodgers is phenomenal in the regular season. But once you get out of that regular season in the postseason, it just has not gone well for them, and I don't expect that to change.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I don't have much to say here other than just like, yeah, they'll be really good, but I probably won't take them seriously for the entire year.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what else you can do with it at this point. Like, it's been a consistent issue for so long for this team.
Yeah, I there's going to be some teams that we talk about in our next division who maybe aren't as sure of things to get there as the Packers are, but I think are just way higher upsides. So, definitely kind of interesting contrasts in the divisions we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. All right. Well, you mentioned it. Let's go ahead and transition to those divisions. Let's go to the NFC West, and we're going to start off with the Seattle Seahawks. So, additions, they drafted Charles Cross, offensive tackle in the draft. They also got Boye Mafe, and then they traded up in the second round to draft Kenneth Walker right after they signed Rashad Penny to a $5.7 million deal. They drafted a linebacker whose name I would just butcher. I'm not going to try to say it, to be honest. Go Google it, I guess. They got defensive tackle Quentin Jefferson, and they signed guard Austin Blythe. They also acquired Drew Lock, Noah Fant, and Shelby Harris via the Russell Wilson trade. So obviously they lose Russell Wilson. They lost Bobby Wagner. They lost Gerald Everett. They lost DJ Reed. And to top it all off, they have the number 22 strength of schedule. So they've got a tough schedule. They've got no quarterback. They've got a head coach that I won't finish that sentence. Their over-unders at 5.5 wins. Mark, talk to me about the Seahawks.
First off, I'll just say that I'll have no Geno Smith slander. Absolutely none of it. Geno Smith is a superstar in this league. Nah, I'm joking. But I always do say it. I feel like I've said this ad nauseum on this podcast, but Geno Smith wasn't that bad when he was a backup last year when he came in for those couple games. It wasn't embarrassing. Drew Lock is embarrassing. If Drew Lock plays like it sounds like they almost want him to, maybe this is a tank job. I don't know. Pete Carroll's a little old for a tank job, so I don't think that's what this is. I really think that they can succeed without Russell Wilson, and I think that there is a lot of positives on this roster. But the quarterback situation is such an absolute mess, and I just don't believe that this team's going to be able to figure it out. And maybe the best thing that could happen for this team, like I said, similarly with the Detroit Lions, is to fail completely and to win 3 games and to be able to go and get that franchise quarterback. And then maybe that Russell Wilson trade with some of those Denver Broncos picks that they got, maybe then that'll start looking a little better for Seattle. But for now, man, it's going to be a tough watch this year for Seattle. I have them under that. What'd you say? It was 5?
5.5.
5.5, 5.5. Yeah, I've seen it at 5. I've seen it at 5.5 at some places. I'll take the under either way. I think they win 3 to 4 games. I have them at 3, and it doesn't hurt, or it doesn't help, I should say, that they're in. I think probably, I don't know. It's tough to say. I feel like I've called 4 divisions the best division in football, but the NFC West is definitely one of the best divisions in football.
Yeah, it's a really good division. And again, I don't have confidence in Pete Carroll, and there's nothing to have confidence in about the quarterback situation. You're going to have a rookie left tackle. It's not the best offensive line. I would take the under on this. They play in a stacked division, too. The other 3 teams are legitimate contenders. And so there's no cakewalk games in the division. They've got a tough schedule. I would take the under here. I do not feel good about the Seahawks, and I think they're going to be all in on a quarterback come next spring.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think that'll be the right move. And I actually think they'll be getting a higher pick from the Denver Broncos than people will expect. So maybe they'll get like 2 top 15 picks, maybe like a top 3 pick, and then a pick between 10 to 20. That would be pretty nice for Seattle.
Yeah, definitely would. Well, we'll get there when we get to the AFC West, but I have thoughts about the Broncos.
Are you positive? Well. Are you positive, or are you negative with me on them?
I'm going to save it. I'm going to save it for the AFC West show.
You're all in, aren't you? You're all in.
No. I'm not all in. I'm not all in.
Okay.
They're one of those teams that needs to be in a different division. But no, I'm not all in on them. We've got RH Lamont chiming in on YouTube again. Says, you're telling me you're not on the lock train? He can throw the ball over the mountain.
RH Lamont's one of my buddies. I used to do podcasts with him also, and we gave Drew Lock, I think it was his rookie year when we were doing that podcast, and we were calling him Young Druzy with him dancing on the sidelines in those videos that were leaking of Drew, and we had to revoke the nickname because he was not good enough to be given that nickname. So Drew Lock, I am not on the lock train, but yeah, he said. I think he had a typo here, but he said, all seriousness, the Seahawks do not value offensive talent. A couple comments there. So, I totally agree. I think that they think like the system is bigger than the player, which is like the ultimate, terrible thing that you can do to yourself as a front office evaluator in the NFL. So, I think that I understand the inclination to do the trade if you're not a contender, and they got an absolute ton to do it. And like I said, maybe if they get that top 3 pick and then you get the 12th pick from Denver, that's fine. But I truly don't believe that they think they're tanking. That's kind of the disconnect, I guess.
Yeah. I don't. It's weird. Like the way that they've talked about it is like they actually believe in Drew Lock. And I know you're not going to come out and say you're tanking, but I really think that they actually think they can compete. And I just don't see it.
Agreed.
All right, let's move on to the 49ers here, who I'm just going to be honest, I hate this schedule graphic. Not a fan. Yeah, it's very poor on the social media team here. But let's talk about their offseason. There's not a lot to talk about. They don't have any draft picks from the Trey Lance trade, but they went and they signed cornerback Shavarius Ward to a 3-year, $40 million deal. He really wasn't that good last year, but they went and signed him. They signed safety George Odom. They lost their center, Alex Mack, and guard Lincoln Tomlinson. They also lost defensive tackle DJ Jones. So not big moves on either side of the ball. Obviously, actually, I'm going to hold off. I'm not going to make this statement yet. I'm going to ask you a question in a minute. But they have the 13th easiest strength of schedule. Their over-under is set at 9.5 wins with a -140 on the over, a +110 on the under. Here's my question for you. Does Jimmy Garoppolo start a game for the 49ers in 2022? There is a $25 million cap savings if they trade or cut him. You know they want to trade him. I don't think anybody's going to bite. If they had, that would have happened already. You can't trade what they traded for Lance and keep Jimmy G at that price this year. Like, they've got to cut Jimmy G, right?
It's really interesting because the team that you would think would be interested is Seattle, and it doesn't seem like they are. The team I've always said should either pick him up when they cut him or trade a fifth or a sixth round pick is Tennessee. I think Tennessee should go and get that insurance for those games where Tannehill is throwing pick after pick. I think having Jimmy G as an option would be a pretty good move for Tennessee, but it really seems like there's not going to be a trade for him. Like you said, if it would have happened, it would have happened. To answer your question, I have like kind of a different statement where it's like Trey Lance is the biggest X factor in the NFL this season, right?
Sure, yeah. I mean, they traded up to number 3 to go get him, and we have no idea what he is. Yeah. We know they weren't comfortable playing him at all last year, except when they absolutely had to, and maybe that speaks volumes in itself. But at the same time, this is a guy that was not considered pro ready, that he was likely to need to sit a year, which made it a little strange for a contender to trade up for a guy that was going to sit for a year. I don't know what to make of the whole thing. He could be great and they're Super Bowl contenders, or he could be terrible. You just literally have no idea. It's one of the most interesting storylines for me to watch in preseason is what Trey Lance looks like.
Yeah, I don't want to say this is like so unfair what I'm about to say and do, but it reminds me a little bit of that, what we were talking about going into that second Mahomes season, his first season as a starter, where it was completely unknown. Mahomes was being drafted as like QB 11, QB 12 in fantasy, right where Trey Lance is being drafted, and it was all based on upside. And he had that one game that he played as a rookie. Trey Lance had 3 games that he played as a rookie, but throwing out those first 2 that they really relied on his legs and really had him run the ball a ton, and they ran the ball with the running backs a ton as well in those games. With pretty high success rate. Their running game was really good with Trey Lance in, which makes sense. It always happens that way with mobile quarterbacks. But that last game that he played against the Houston Texans, I think there was legitimate growth and legitimate signs that pointed to, obviously not a Mahomes level talent, but what I always said about Trey Lance was the reason that you go up and give up the picks that San Fran did, and the reason that you take him third, and in my opinion, he should have went over Zach Wilson. The reason I was high on the idea of Trey Lance is because there's a lot of Josh Allen there, coming from that small school with such incredible raw skills and such a huge arm and such great mobility with such great size. It's easy to tell why he's so tantalizing. So if he can put it together, and if he's NFL ready after sitting for a year, and by the way, like you mentioned it perfectly, like I don't think people should take away the fact that he didn't play to mean that, oh, he wasn't ready. Like, I think he got very much labeled with not ready tag before he even got drafted, because he had to take a year off for COVID purposes with the North Dakota State team. They didn't play the year before that he got drafted. And I think that coming from that small school, people labeled him as, not NFL ready, which, fair or not, I think that kind of tainted his chances at playing over Jimmy Garoppolo, especially with such a good team last year that San Francisco had. They didn't want to ruin that, which we've talked about on this pod. I think it was a mistake. I think they should have went with Trey Lance after that Houston game and seen what that upside could have done for them. I truly do think that they would have went to the Super Bowl if they would have done that. So I think there's a chance Trey Lance comes in and is an MVP candidate. I think if you were to tell me, like, I don't have the MVP odds right in front of me, but if you made me pick people other than Rodgers, Allen, Brady, Mahomes, and the usual top tier, Burrow suspects, those top guys, I think Trey Lance is the outside the box name that I would give you, because I do think with that Shanahan system, with Deebo Samuel, with George Kittle, with a ton of running back options, with Elijah Mitchell leading the way, and with probably the best offensive line in the NFL, if not one of the top 5 offensive lines in the NFL. I think that there is an absolute ton to be excited about with San Francisco, and they are every bit a Super Bowl contender, in my opinion. I have them over the win total, and I have them winning 12 games. I actually have them as a wild card, though, so 12 games doesn't get it done in the NFC West.
Yeah, I think it was absolutely a mistake the way they handled the quarterback situation last year. If you're going to trade that much to go get a guy, you've got to play him. And if they played him early in the year, he would have given them a better shot to win playoff games than Jimmy G did. And I know they didn't need that. They were a Jaquiski Tart dropped interception away from being in the Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. But are you in that position if you've got a quarterback that offers a little bit more? And so now you enter year 2, and again, you're going to have to go through those growing pains, and they could have already been in the rearview mirror. So if you win the Super Bowl, then it was the right decision, but they didn't. And so now in hindsight, it would have been far better for Trey Lance to have been the guy. I'm taking the over on 9.5 wins. It all depends on Trey Lance, though. But Kyle Shanahan has put Jimmy G on his back for years. I think he can do the same thing with Trey Lance, but Trey Lance offers things that Jimmy G doesn't. And that defense is just so good. Added into the fact that I am not high on another team we're about to talk about in their division. I think they've got a clear path to being the second team in the division. And if if Trey Lance turns out to be the real deal, I think they could make a strong push for the division.
Yeah, I think the two best teams in the NFC are, you know what? That's not fair to Tampa. I think the two teams that have the best chance at going to the Super Bowl are in this division, in my opinion. I think Tampa is probably one of the better teams, and I think I'm more sure that they'll be there because their division is just putrid, in my opinion, as we talked about on last pod. But I think the upside that's there that we saw for the Rams, by the way, we talked about it through the whole thing. Like, we didn't even feel like the Rams played up to their level that they could have played even in their Super Bowl run. And McVay was shooting them in the foot at times, and Stafford tried to throw the games away. So I feel like we haven't even seen what the Rams can be. And I think the 49ers have the upside with that roster. If Trey Lance is a top 10 guy, if Trey Lance is closer on the spectrum to Josh Allen than he is to Jalen Hurts, then I think that this is a 49ers team that I would pick to win the Super Bowl if I know that. But if he's more like Jalen Hurts than he is like Josh Allen, then I still think the 49ers will be really good. And I think that they'll win 10, 11, maybe even 12 games. But then that will definitely cap what they can do in the playoffs, obviously, if Trey Lance isn't that next level of quarterback. But like I said, he is absolutely the number one X factor in the entire NFL. I think he's the most important player this season.
We've got Dino7 on YouTube says Jimmy G is trash. I think he should go to the Seahawks, though. So I will say this. Jimmy G is one of the most confident quarterbacks throwing over the middle of the field that should not be that I've ever seen. Like, I wish I had the confidence, the unmerited confidence that Jimmy G has.
Yeah, Jimmy G is a tough evaluation, man. Like, there's times where I watch him and I'm like, man, this guy is just not that good. But he finds ways to win, and, you know, you could say that that's Shanahan. You could say that that's just the system and all this stuff. But I do think that there has to be – I don't like doing the off-the-field thing, but I do think that there, at a certain point, there has to be something to the fact that everyone that ever plays with Jimmy G comes out and says how great of a guy he is and how good of a leader he is and how much they like playing for him. And I think that there is a cool factor almost to Jimmy G, that he brings a presence to your team that I think a Kirk Cousins, who maybe is a little bit better than Jimmy G. I think that's fair to say, right? Would you say Kirk's a little better than Jimmy G?
Yeah, I would. But I'd rather have Jimmy G.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, I think Jimmy G's so much more confident, and I think the team likes him more, and you don't think he's going to fold under pressure in the same way Kirk Cousins is. So it's an interesting – Jimmy G is an interesting player, man. One of the more confounding players in the NFL for sure.
Yeah, has a very strange career arc for sure.
Oh, so weird.
All right, let's roll on to the Arizona Cardinals. They added tight end Trey McBride in the draft. They also traded for Marquise Brown. They gave up way too much for him. And they signed A.J. Green, the shell of A.J. Green. They lost inside linebacker Jordan Hicks. They also lost Christian Kirk, who just got a ridiculous amount of money from the Jaguars. They lost Chandler Jones, Chase Edmonds, and Jordan Phillips. This is a team that lost a lot of people. They went out and they got Marquise Brown. They've got the drama going on between the organization and between Kyler Murray right now. They've got the DeAndre Hopkins 6-game suspension looming over them. They have the 24th ranked strength of schedule, so they've got a difficult schedule. And Vegas reflects this. It's showing an over-under of 8.5 wins right now. Where are you at with the Cardinals?
This is one of the teams that I absolutely would not touch on either side of betting them. I have them at 8-9, mainly because of the division, and I just don't think that it's going to be possible for how good I think the Rams and the Niners are going to be. I think the Cardinals at best go 1-3 in those games, and then you have a pretty tough schedule outside of that with games against Kansas City, Las Vegas. You have Minnesota on there. You have Tampa on there. New England, not an easy game. The Chargers, a really tough game. And then obviously those 4 games I mentioned. I think that it's just a brutal schedule with not a lot of gimmies on there at all. So it's kind of the opposite of last year. I think they feasted on easy competition early on in the season en route to a really hot start. I'd feel a little bit better if they had Hopkins for the full season and he wasn't suspended for the first 6 games. But they're one of the teams that I could see going either way. Like I could see this season kind of going down and torpedoing and into a 5 or a 6 win team that gets Cliff in hot water, even with his new contract extension, and maybe even forces a Kyler Murray trade demand. But I could also see a scenario where maybe they do go 11-6 or 12-5, and we're all sitting there saying maybe we overreacted to some of the offseason stuff and some of the moves that happened in the offseason with the Cardinals. And it'll be more than likely it'll probably be somewhere in between, right around that 8.5 number on either side of it. Like they'll probably go 8-9 or 9-8 and miss the playoffs just barely. That would probably be my best guess, but this is one of those teams where I can truly see all the outcomes. And maybe I'm just giving too much respect to Kyler because I really do think Kyler is one of the 7 to 10 best quarterbacks in the NFL. And I think he is going to give Arizona a higher floor than maybe they should have with that coaching idiot buffoon in Cliff Kingsbury and a roster that I think has a lot more flaws than we would think if Kyler Murray wasn't the quarterback.
Yeah, I can't believe in this team while Cliff Kingsbury is still the coach. I think he's horrible. This is a guy who could not win games with Patrick Mahomes in the Big 12. So I'm done with Cliff. He should have never got an NFL job. He's proven consistently since he got it why he shouldn't have gotten it. I'm taking the under here. I think this has the potential to be a train wreck this season. Hopkins is gone. They fell apart without Hopkins last year. He's going to miss the first 6 games. You come out and you struggle like you did at the end of the year. The smoke around the Kyler Murray stuff, the issues with the organization is only going to get bigger. I could see this team falling apart and just having an abysmal season. And so I would slam the under on this. I just think there's too much of a chance for this whole thing to implode.
Yeah, no, there's definitely implode potential there. Absolutely, with some of the behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah. So, all right, well, let's move on to the reigning Super Bowl champions. We have the Los Angeles Rams. They went out this offseason and they added Bobby Wagner. They added Allen Robinson. So they lost Johnny Hecker. So maybe they can't run as many fake punts now. Johnny Hecker is a guy that, I don't know, for some reason I just always loved Johnny Hecker. They lost Von Miller, who went to the Buffalo Bills. They lost cornerback Darius Williams, guard Austin Corbett. They lost defensive tackle Joseph. And then OBJ, he's technically still on the market. He's not under contract. I don't know what's happening there with that. But I have to assume they've probably moved on because they brought in Allen Robinson. But he's still a guy that's out there that you could maybe see them try to bring back. They have the second most difficult schedule in the NFL, 31st ranked strength of schedule. And their over-under is set at 10.5 wins. So how do you feel about the Rams headed into this season?
It's funny. Andrew Whitworth is another loss that they had to retirement. Their bookend tackle for the last a ton of years as well. So they lost a lot. I don't love their offseason. Like, I don't think the Rams had a good offseason. I know people are going to look at the flashy Bobby Wagner name, and Allen Robinson's a fun name. Allen Robinson was bad last year, and I know that a lot of that's about Chicago, about the Bears. He had some drops. Like, he wasn't graded out well in PFF. Like, I don't think Allen Robinson was very good last year, and it's hard for me to reconcile him just not trying in a contract year. I struggle with what Allen Robinson is at this point, and I think they lost two additions who really unlocked other players on their team. So, am I that concerned with the Rams losing the production of an Odell or the production of a Von Miller? Not necessarily. Like, I don't think that they're losing a ton with just the. Do you get what I'm saying? Just in terms of the impact of those guys singularly, but I think what Von Miller did for Aaron Donald was immeasurably important, and how much he opened things up for Aaron Donald was so important, and then how much Odell opened things up for Cooper Kupp to have one of the greatest postseason runs of all time, probably the greatest postseason run of all time for a wide receiver. I think that kind of stuff is immeasurable, and you're losing those things, but having said all of that negatively about the Super Bowl champions, they have Matthew Stafford at quarterback. They have Sean McVay at head coach. They have the greatest defensive player we've seen in our lifetimes in Aaron Donald, entrenched there at defensive tackle. And they have Jalen Ramsey out wide at corner. And they have the guy who had the best wide receiver season of all time last year in Cooper Kupp, who, in my opinion, should have been the MVP. It's hard for me to get too upset about the things that they did on the fringes of the roster when you have so many important pieces right. So ultimately, I still have the Rams winning 13 games. I still have the Rams competing to go to the Super Bowl. And I think they're one of the very best rosters in the NFL, even after saying all that I didn't like about their offseason.
Yeah, I don't think they had the best offseason. It's hard to have a great offseason with no picks, and they never have picks. And when you're cap strapped, which they're going to be because they don't have draft picks. Of all of the losses, though, the Von Miller loss hurts the worst. For the reasons you stated, how it unlocks Aaron Donald, which is a guy that doesn't need help, but if you give it to him, that's fantastic. I still really like their team. I would take the over 10.5 wins.
Me too.
I'm interested to see how Allen Robinson does in this offense. That's one of the things I'm most interested to see, because if Allen Robinson can get back, to the player he was a couple of years ago, instead of how he looked last season, that's going to be a huge addition for this offense. And so overall, I think they win the division. I think San Francisco could push them if Trey Lance is what the 49ers thought he could be. But I wouldn't bet on that right now. I've got the Rams winning the division. I would take them over 10.5 wins. And if I had to pick right now, I would say they're probably the NFC representative in the Super Bowl again. But we'll have to see how the season, how it plays out. I agree. Inside the Edge said on YouTube here, I think he said Allen Robinson is the key, and I think there's a lot of truth in that. Cooper Kupp is going to be Cooper Kupp. He's going to get his yards, but if Allen Robinson can come in and he can be, a solid second option, it's going to open up so many things in this offense. And they've got the quarterback that can take advantage of him this year in Matthew Stafford. And don't forget that mid to late season, they were not playing very well, and then they put it together for the stretch. And so now you've got Matthew Stafford another year into this offense. Can they pick up where they left off instead of having all those growing pains they went through last year? So I think this could be a really good football team. You always have that Super Bowl hangover that you have in the back of your head, though. Are they going to come out hungry? Are they going to have rested a little bit this offseason and lost a step? So there's a lot of fascinating storylines to follow with the Rams, but I do have them as my favorites to win that division.
Yeah, I think that the NFC Championship game is going to be the LA Rams against the San Francisco 49ers. My pick is the Niners for now to go to the Super Bowl if we're making our tentative picks, but I have the Rams winning the division for now. So I don't know what that says. So those are the two teams that I think have the best chance, and I think that there's so much right with both of their rosters that there's certain things that annoy me with what they did as front offices this offseason. But, having said all that, it's hard to be too annoyed when you have the stars that they have. So I think it's going to be interesting to watch this division down the stretch. It's kind of the divisions mirror each other a little bit in terms of the top two, where I view the Vikings kind of like I view the Niners, where it's like, oh, if this system takes off in Minnesota with a new offensive mind in there, where maybe you unlock Kirk Cousins a little bit and Justin Jefferson takes even another step, and Dalvin Cook stays healthy and Adam Thielen stays healthy, then maybe they're a 12 to 13 win team that has a higher upside than Green Bay. And I almost feel the same way with San Francisco if Trey Lance is the top, 10 quarterback and closer to Josh Allen. they could easily be the best team in football and win 14 or 15 games and win the NFC West. And kind of the same way that they did when they went to the Super Bowl and lost to the Chiefs. Like, I think that's very much a possibility with this team and how dominant they could be. But it'll definitely be fun to watch. I'm a little upset that the Rams-Niners games are both so early in the season. Both games are in October, when I think those are going to be huge, huge games.
Yeah, I hate how I've said this, I floated this on this podcast before, but the NFL really just needs to put weeks 1 through 3 and weeks 16 through 18 are divisional games and nobody has buys. And then week 4 through 15, that's your outside the division games and your buys. I'd love to see that set up. It would just give maximum impact to your divisional games that they're starting and ending the season.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is going to about wrap it up here. We have now previewed all 4 divisions in the NFC. Starting next week, we'll start going through the AFC, and then we'll get into training camp stuff and other things as we wind down our off-season coverage. I'm so ready to get back into our regular season coverage. The preview and review shows, I have missed those. I love the draft. This is the slow time of the off-season, though. All that excitement building. But, Mark, before we get out of here, you tease some final thoughts about the Eagles for us.
Yeah, I don't know if we talked about this. I could be wrong. I talk on too many shows, and I get confused with where I said what where. So I might have already said this, or I don't know if we talked about this piece of news, but did we talk about Nick Sirianni coming out and saying that Shane Steichen was calling plays and he took over the play calling duties halfway through that last year? Did we talk about that on the pod?
I think we mentioned it, but I don't think we really talked about it much.
I feel like people have heard that and just ran with it and taken it as gospel and act like it's really important. My take on it is, honestly, I think Nick Sirianni's trying to get his buddy head coaching interviews next offseason. I think he's trying to. I don't think that they're like, maybe Shane Steichen is calling plays, but Nick Sirianni is giving him the menu, and I think that it's like probably a pretty limited menu. Like, I think Nick Sirianni is heavily involved in the game planning and heavily involved in, trying to kind of scheme things before the game, and then maybe Shane Steichen picks the situations. But I think it's really overblown and much ado about nothing, and I think that it's kind of what you do when you're in Sirianni's position and you have such. I mean, right now, Nick Sirianni has incredible job security. Am I wrong?
No, I think you're right there, and I don't care if he's the one calling the plays. I mean, I would much rather a guy realize he's got a lot of things on his plate and he's not going to be the one physically calling the plays. Like, that doesn't mean he's not game planning and all those other things. I had no problem with that. I know people made a big deal out of it, but I just don't care.
Yeah, I don't care about it either, as long as kind of like what I just laid out, where he's, laying out the plays before in practice and game planning the first 20, which is what every NFL team does anyway. And then after that, you have halftime to make adjustments. Like Nick Sirianni, he's still an offensive minded guy. Like, if he sees something in the first half and he wants to change going into the second half, guess who's going to make that call? Like, Sirianni. It's not going to be Shane Steichen. So I really do think that it's truly just Sirianni being like, the good guy coach and trying to get his buddy hired somewhere else next year. And Jeffrey Lurie's always been very cognizant and aware of the whole coaching tree thing. They used to bring it up all the time when Andy Reid was here, talking about the coaching tree that they had around the NFL. I think that that's something that Lurie cares about a lot. It's something that Howie cares about a lot. So I think it it goes in line with everything of like the Eagles culture, that Sirianni would kind of just go out there and get his boy a job.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. We've got Inside the Edge here, said, cool chat. Love the channel. Take care, fellas. Thanks for tuning in for all the comments here. I'm glad you are enjoying the show. Be sure you check out the rest of our content. There's a lot of cool stuff out there and a lot of cool projects that we've got coming down the pipe as we get closer to the season. But Mark, anything else you want to throw out before we get out of here today?
No, fun show. We'll do the AFC next week. Eventually, I'll force Shane. We're going to do a fantasy spectacular. Maybe I'll get a fun guest or something. we'll figure it out. It's going to be a fun next. I don't know, what is it, 6-7 weeks now until the season.
Yeah, you're gonna need a good guest if it's a fantasy show. That's for sure.
No, you're gonna. We'll get some. It'll be fun to get some takes from a non fantasy player. It's almost. I listened to a. This is such a like a niche reference, but I listened to a wrestling podcast, and one of the people. It's about old wrestling from like the late '90s and early 2000s. They go back and review these shows, and one of them is a fan of wrestling, but he wasn't watching at the time, and he's never seen any of that stuff. So it's like a fresh set of eyes giving an opinion. That'll be what Shane is. Like we'll have him look at fantasy rankings, and he'll be like, wait a second, DJ Moore is ranked 8th in receivers over like DK Metcalf. Like I think that there'll be fun rankings. You'll see like, wait a second, Jalen Hurts is ranked over Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers and and Dak Prescott and Joe Burrow. Like I think there'll be fun things that you'll be shocked by in the little fantasy bubble.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Mark may talk me into it. He may talk me into it. We'll see. I'm not a big fantasy football guy. I like my real football. Not the biggest fantasy guy, but I'm sure Mark can persuade me into it. We got to fill that off season up somehow. So, good show. This was good stuff. It's been interesting looking through the NFC. It's brought up some things on some teams that I hadn't really thought about much before. So I'm anxious to dig into the AFC, which is a conference that I don't follow as closely as the NFC with all the Eagles coverage. I've been more in tune with the NFC offseason. So I'm interested to dig into the AFC and see how I've kind of got those teams tiered out. So that'll start next week. Until then, thank you guys for joining us for episode number 64 of Chalk Talk. If you enjoy what you heard on the show, and we know that you do, unless you're a Bears fan who's mad at us now, but be sure you smash that subscribe button so you don't miss the next episode. Drop us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. You can follow us on Twitter. I'm at _TPL. He is at Mark, what is it? You usually have
Mark. I usually have it
underscore. Mark Henry Jr. underscore. So give us a follow on Twitter. We put a lot of stuff out there. From me, from Mark, who is saluting you right now out of habit, but you can't see it, and from the Painted Lines. We will see you guys next time.